Karski had an air of moral aristocracy about him, and his narrative had all the appeal of the adventures of James Bond. His dream was to become a diplomat. He was smart, handsome, he studied foreign languages.
He was working for the Polish underground.
One of the leaders in Krakow gave me a microfilm. Gestapo found this microfilm. They could prove you are a spy.
On May 5th, 1943, a secret telegram from Poland's foreign ministry reached the embassy in the United States.
Karski was on his way to Washington with a very special mission to inform President Roosevelt personally of what was going on in Poland.
I saw a lord of humanity. When you describe them, what is happening to the Jews, they will not believe you. What would help our cause if you, with your own eyes, see the situation in the Warsaw Ghetto? I couldn't take anymore, but I reported. We have a choice. We can choose to be robbers, we can choose to be good people. Now I go back 35 years. No, I don't go back, you know. It's not
If you find yourself in a circumstance, whatever it is, you can do something to make a difference. Let Karski's story be one of those that inspires you to try.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great honor for me to perform here tonight on such a special event. I would like to introduce the group real quick. This is Steven Kortyka on tenor saxophone. And Eduardo Bello on double bass. My name is Rafal Sarnecki. The song we just performed is a song called Polskie Drogi. It's a very famous song in Poland. It's a song from a Polish TV series about the life of people in Poland during the Second World War. We will continue with a piece called Ta ostatnia niedziela, which was the favorite song of Jan Karski. And we'll finish up with a composition of mine entitled Song from a New Place, which I wrote when I was a student here at the New School over 10 years ago. Thank you very much.
Can we have a hand for that wonderful music before they leave? Thank you. Just beautiful. Great way to begin such an evening. Welcome to the new school. I'm honored. We're honored here to host the Spirit of Jan Karski Award presentation this year. Thanks for the wonderful music. Thanks to Andrzej Rojek, the chairman of the board of the Jan Karski Educational Foundation. And my real gratitude goes to my dear colleague, Robert Kostreva, who has helped to organize this event. Thank you, Robert. My name is William Milberg. I'm the dean of the New School for Social Research, professor of economics here. The New School for Social Research was founded in 1933. At the time, it was called the University in Exile, when another Lord of Humanity by the name of Alvin Johnson from Nebraska brilliantly and bravely set about to bring first 10 and then almost 100 German Jewish scholars right here to the New School on 12th Street after they had been fired from their posts with the April 1933 Civil Service Reform Act and subsequently attacked by the Nazi regime. Johnson constituted the University in Exile on 12th Street, really one of the boldest moves in American higher education. Now, Jan Karski's bravery of giving witness with his firsthand knowledge of the Holocaust was a courageous mission of rescue and truth-seeking, two objectives that boldly drove our own history as a university and which we like to think continue to motivate us today. Our name has changed from the University in Exile to the New School for Social Research, but we continue to take a very critical approach to an analysis of contemporary life. We debate on a daily basis in our hallways, in our classrooms, the status of democracy, the origins of authoritarianism, the rights of the stateless, and the structural nature of social inequity. We host a University in Exile professor each year, a scholar from Syria or from China, for example. We also host the Endangered Scholars Worldwide Network, which is brought online by our Center for Public Scholarship. The University in Exile was a rescue mission, a scholar rescue mission, and it brought a very distinct intellectual tradition to the United States in my field of economics, in philosophy, sociology, political theory, just another example of how immigration has enriched this country. In the 1980s, the New School again showed a deep commitment to political and intellectual freedom with the establishment of a clandestine set of democracy seminars in Poland, as the Solidarity movement mobilized resistance to the political and cultural oppression of late communist Eastern Europe. I'll let Jeff Goldfarb, who will introduce our honoree today, to say more about that because he was directly involved. But you should know that this effort by Jeff and others was a continuation of our very proud tradition at the New School, embracing freedom in the public space. Today, the energetic discussion is often online, and Jeff again has championed the intellectual online dialogue in our public seminar, www.publicseminar.org, and I recommend it to you. It's a very lively space. It could never happen here, of course. But I must say that as I have watched Trump call for a ban on immigration of Muslims, or have observed police excesses towards Black Americans, or seen on television, as I did last night, a video of a Trump rallier screaming "USA" to the USA chant, one doesn't have to use too much imagination to see a decline in civility and respect and a rise in racism and the denial of truth. At these moments, it's important not just to never forget, but to remember that resistance and courage, a la Karski, are human traits. And while we celebrate Jan Karski tonight, we also celebrate his legacy in people like Nicholas Kristof, and the hope that when the real moment of decision arrives, that we will be blessed with more Jan Karskis. Karski's life showed not only courage and incredible cleverness and diplomacy, but also lessons about authenticity and humility. He was a resistant, a diplomat, a messenger, and a witness. And he never seemed to forget that his heroism was not about him, but about the victims of the brutality that he witnessed. His humility in the face of outrage is another lesson for all of us, but especially for our leaders of today, an important part of his spirit that is sometimes lost amidst the bravery. So welcome to the new school, and I am pleased now to introduce my colleague Jeff Goldfarb. He is the Michael Gellert Professor of Sociology, an expert in the sociology of public life, including theater, media, the life of the intellectual, and of the politician, the author of numerous books, including After the Fall, The Pursuit of Democracy in Central Europe, Civility and Subversion, the Intellectual in Democratic Society, and famously, The Politics of Small Things, The Power of the Powerless in Dark Times. All have been written in English, translated into Polish, and his work in Eastern Europe, and especially in Poland for over 30 years, makes him a perfect candidate to introduce tonight's recipient of the Spirit of Jan Karski Award. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay, so I have some prepared remarks, but I suppose I should say a little bit about the democracy seminar and decenter it. So a group of us at the New School, including my dear friend and colleague Elżbieta Matynia, Andrew Arado, Jose Casanova, developed a seminar in collaboration with our friend, now I can say our dear friend, Adam Michnik, and a group of scholars, intellectuals, dissidents in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. A clandestine seminar where our first seminar reading was Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism. And before the internet, without free borders, we recorded our deliberations, exchanged them, and tried to exist with a normal international, cosmopolitan, intellectual life as if we were all free citizens. Of course, only some of us were, but the good fortune was that this was done starting in 1984, and that just a few years after being underground, we spent a number of years working above ground. And out of the democracy seminar, we developed a program called the Trans-Regional Center for Democratic Studies, which has had summer schools in Poland and South Africa, bringing what I like to think in the spirit, or the sorts of people that engaged in those original democracy seminars now from a much broader national, international social world. And indeed, we do think that these activities and this event is very much in the spirit not only of Jan Karski, but also the spirit of the New School. So it's a great pleasure now for me to present, to give my thoughts about the presentation of this award to Jan Karski. I'm thrilled to introduce this year's recipient of the Jan Karski Award, as the award honors the work of this year's prize winner, Nicholas Kristof, and as his work helps us remember Jan Karski and his spirit, and illuminates the nature of his actions, both his heroism and their tragedy. Karski went into the belly of the genocidal beast, into the Warsaw Ghetto and a Nazi transit camp, becoming an eyewitness to modern barbarism. He crossed Nazi Europe to report to the leaders of the surviving Western democracies what he saw. But he failed in his objective, to convince Churchill and Roosevelt, with whom he had face-to-face meetings, to make ending the systematic annihilation of European Jewry a principal objective of the war effort. As a result, Karski himself realistically understood his mission as a failure, and in a very real sense, it was. But sometimes realism is misleading. His meeting with Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, in Karski's memory, most visibly represented the failure. Years later, in an interview shown in Claude Lausman's Shoah, Karski recalled the meeting. As it concluded, Frankfurter told Karski that he appreciated the veracity of his testimony, but he still didn't believe it. This is an enduring tragedy, Karski's tragedy. But it is not only his, it is also ours. To recognize your humanitarian crisis is one thing. To truly comprehend it and to take the required action in response to this understanding is something else completely. We know that horrors exist in our world, but somehow we don't really believe that they are happening or don't want to act upon the belief. We act as if they didn't exist because they are some, oops, I can't believe it. Oh, I thought I lost a page. So removed from how we experience the world, and so unsettle our understandings of our experience of ourselves. They seem to be unreal. Moral beings, even anti-Semites, don't intentionally and industrially slaughter their fellow human beings. Even a Jew, such as Frankfurter, couldn't get beyond this state of inaction. His stance is ours, caught between knowledge and belief, frozen in inaction. This frozen zone of Karski's tragedy is distinctively Nicholas Kristof's beat. It is the hallmark of Kristof's journalism to make visible the inhumane, to break through the common sense that tells us that the barbaric couldn't possibly exist, to move his readers to action. He reports to provide information about that which we don't want to know. He works tirelessly, using a variety of different rhetorical strategies to make the inconceivable, the apparently unreal, real, to make it apparent, and further, to make it actionable. He has provided information and challenges his readers to respond. His columns, articles, books on the democracy movement in China, the tragedies of Darfur, Iraq and Syria, human trafficking at home and abroad, the refugee crises, fistula, the global struggle for women's rights and dignity, and, most recently, the lived experience of poverty in America, reveal the tragedies of our time, and they call for action. As Karski revealed the horrors of the 20th century, Kristof reveals horrors of our times. And like Karski, Kristof is engaged in a struggle to get us to pay attention, with some successes, but also with failure. Human trafficking continues. Syria only gets worse. Kristof's reports from Darfur span a decade. We good Americans still fear and turn our backs on refugees, as Churchill, Roosevelt, and Frankfurter, honorable men, and the broader public turn their back on European Jewry. I'll add, including some of my distant relatives. The struggle for Kristof, like the struggle of Karski, is not only to tell the world, to make the human suffering visible, but also to move us by making the suffering they reveal real in the face of commonly accepted but severely limited realism. We sociologists, I am a sociologist, know that it is harder than people generally think. If, quotes, we define a situation as real, it's real in its consequences. This, the so-called Thomas theorem, is a central proposition in my field. It is through such power of definition that we create ourselves, that we constitute our social world. The way we express ourselves, both in the expressions that we intentionally give and the expressions we inadvertently give off constitutes the social realities of nation, race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality, and more. It explains their persistence and their plasticity. When people assert, for example, that race is a social construction, sociologists know, or at least we think we know, that this in no way makes race any less real. We human beings confirm this reality in what Irving Goffman classically referred to as the presentation of self in everyday life. And we face difficult constraints in working to reframe our presentations in such a way as to change that reality. It can be a long struggle. This is the struggle of Kristof. His response to the tragedy of Karski that he strenuously works on, it is poignantly revealed when he posed a question in a column. Do you care about a dog more than a refugee? He brings things to our attention and does all he can to make these things real. There is an absurdity in this, demonstrated in the question, dog or refugee. It suggests futility. But that we gather here now and think about such matters is a strong rebuttal against such a conclusion. Rather, there is hope against hopelessness. There is the power of what I call in my work the politics of small things, an idea drawn from the political thinking of Hannah Arendt, whose ghost walks the halls of the New School. The horror of the Shoah continued despite Karski, but because someone visibly said no, makes the world a different place than the one that would have been if he hadn't acted the way he did. We remember and celebrate his heroism, and thus an alternative to the realistic acceptance of horror exists. We are challenged. We can act accordingly. We honor Nicholas Kristof tonight because he has acted in such a way. Nicholas Kristof and Jan Karski both have made a difference, sources of light in dark times. As Karski illuminates the quality of Kristof's achievements, and as Kristof honors the legacy of Karski. And as I have the great pleasure to present tonight's honoree, Nicholas Kristof.
Thanks very much. I'm really delighted to be here, flattered to be here. I also just want to start by thanking and introducing my wife, who is here, who's been very much a partner in my efforts in book writing and news writing. And when I go travel into a war zone, then it's often hardest on the family left behind. So let me introduce Cheryl. I'm really appreciative and flattered by this, not only because Jan Karski was one of the great figures of the 20th century, not only because I have Polish roots. Kristof originated as Kristofowicz, but maybe above all because Karski, in a sense, is a story of uplift. And at this time, we really need it. He's a story of uplift at a particularly grim time in our history. I'm regularly asked how it is that I manage to cover issues like war, genocide, human trafficking, poverty, and remain pretty upbeat. And the answer is that invariably, side by side with the worst of humanity, you find the very best. And that was true in World War II. We tend to think of World War II in terms of Hitler. World War II was also Jan Karski. It was also the incredible Witold Pilecki, who sneaked into Auschwitz to help get the word out. And this is something that I have just been bowled over again and again in my reporting. I remember one time I was in Congo, which is the most lethal conflict since World War II. And I interviewed a warlord who had been busy massacring and raping people, but maybe the person who left the deepest impression on me on that visit was this little old Polish nun who had been in eastern Congo for more than 20 years. And when all the aid workers there were evacuated, she stayed behind. She was single-handedly running a school, an orphanage, an emergency feeding center. And just as the warlord indicated or reflected the human capacity for evil, she reflected the human capacity for courage and resilience and altruism. And I've got to say, I came back from Eastern Congo feeling better about humanity and kind of wanting to grow up and become a Polish nun. I remember likewise in covering Darfur, I have recollections of terrible things that I saw. But one of the people who left a particularly deep impression on me was a woman called Saada. She was in a camp for displaced people, and I was trying to gather stories. It turned out that she and her younger sister, her 15-year-old sister, had been out gathering firewood outside the camp. They had seen the Janjaweed militia approaching, and Saada told her sister Halima, run for the camp. And then she made a distraction of herself and ran the other way. And the Janjaweeds saw her, they caught up with her, they brutally beat her, and 8 of them gang raped her. And she told me this story, and one of the challenges in journalism is how do you get informed consent to use stories? It's much more powerful if you can use a name, if you can use a photo, a video, but that risks getting people in trouble. It risks stigmatizing people. And so you obviously need consent, but how do you get informed consent from a Darfuri peasant who doesn't know what the New York Times is, what the internet is? And so I was asking her, why she agreed and why it is that she was saying to use her picture and this kind of thing. And she said something that I will never forget, that I want to do this because this is the only tool I have to fight back. And so I think of that kind of courage that she displayed and that I've seen in so many of these other humanitarian crises all over the map. And it's those people who are the real Jan Karskis out there, and you see them in every conflict around the world. I want to offer just a few provocations, if you will, and reflections. I mean, one thing that I've wondered about is why in the 1930s and 1940s we in this country did not respond when Karski came, when we heard through other means about what was happening. Why didn't we take refugees? When a ship of refugees, mostly Jewish refugees, arrives and sees the lights of Miami, why do we turn it back and send it back to Europe to have people die in the Holocaust? And I think that there are some lessons that maybe are relevant to today. I think that one reason we did not respond better is this incredible human capacity we have to otherize people who are different from ourselves. And we can otherize people based on race or religion or immigration status or whatever it may be. And I think, and the second thing is that when we're scared, we make bad decisions. And in the 1930s and 40s, we were scared. And that made it easier to turn people away, to otherize, to show less compassion or empathy. And likewise, I think today, we are scared of terrorism, of violence, and I think in that context, it becomes easier to otherize refugees or Muslims or people who are undocumented or people of different races, whatever it may be. there are a few areas, I think, that if Karski were alive, where he would hope to see more U.S. leadership on international issues. And one is conflicts around the world that involve mass atrocities or even genocide. One looks at Syria, of course. One looks at South Sudan, Yemen, where we are supporting a coalition that is, frankly, engaging in war crimes. And I think that one of the constraints here, and as I said, this is a provocation, I'm sure plenty of you will agree, but I think that one of the challenges is that after the Iraq War and Afghanistan, that we've internalized the idea that the military toolbox is useless. And this is, I think, especially true in liberal circles. I say that as a liberal who opposed the Iraq War, who opposed the Afghan surge, who tends to be allergic to military intervention. And yet, I do think that that toolbox can be used at times for humanitarian reasons. And I'd say that as 250,000 people in eastern Aleppo face an onslaught today, I think that there is more we can do and that the military toolbox should be examined for options. There are all kinds of proposals for sort of mini versions of no-fly zones, in effect to ground the Syrian Air Force, not to challenge the Russian Air Force, but if I don't think Russia wants to be Syria's Air Force, and to try to ground Syria's Air Force so at least it can't drop barrel bombs. It's not perfect. Could it mitigate the problems? Perhaps. A second area, aside from those conflicts, mass atrocities, is refugees. You know, we have 60 million people around the world who are displaced by war and conflict. 60 million, the greatest number since the aftermath of World War II. Syrians are maybe the best example of that. And the solution is not to admit every Syrian. The most crucial thing one can do is to help address the forces that are propelling people away. The second thing one has to do a much better job of is to support those refugees in surrounding countries, especially in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. 200,000 Syrian kids right now in Lebanon are not able to go to school. If you're a Syrian parent who loves your children and your kids are in Lebanon and can't go to school, then you will do what you can to get them to Europe or America so that they can have an education and a future. And education is something that is cheap, that we know how to do. Syria is hard. Getting Syrian kids in Lebanon in school is something we absolutely can do if we have the will. Canada is an interesting contrast to the US. In the US, it's been immensely controversial to admit a total of 11,000 Syrian refugees so far. 11,000. It's less than 1% of the number that Lebanon has taken. Canada has already taken more than 30,000, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau essentially, I mean, there were uncertainties within Canada, but he showed leadership, moral leadership, political leadership. He went to the airport with winter jackets to hand them out to Syrians who were arriving, and he made it a Canadian source of pride to show that they are part of the solution to an international crisis. That was, I think, the best kind of leadership, and I think we can, in this country, we can learn from it. And I think the third area that Karski might be engaged in today, where he would hope to see greater leadership, is in the struggle against global poverty, hunger, disease. Almost 1/4 of children around the world today suffer from stunting because of malnutrition. Almost 1/4. And while we measure stunting in terms of physical measurements, the greatest disability from that is cognitive, that the same malnutrition that reduces your height also reduces your cognitive capacity for the rest of your life. And again, this is something, a lot of international problems are pretty hard. Stunting is something we know how to address. There is this perception that global poverty disease is hopeless. 90% of Americans say that global poverty is either worsening or staying the same. In fact, it's been one of the great successes of the modern world. Since 1990, the number of people living in extreme poverty has dropped by more than half. The number of children dying before the age of 5 has dropped by more than half. Some diseases like guinea worm and polio are on their way out. And I think we psych ourselves out sometimes when we are on the cusp. I mean, in our lifetimes, we will eliminate extreme poverty, the situation in which most humans have lived for the entire history of humanity. When I was in college, 44% of the world population lived in extreme poverty. Holding it for inflation, the number is just below 10% today. Another 15 years, it'll be down to below 3%. This is an extraordinary time, and I don't think we're fully engaged in that fight, in that struggle. And lastly, I want to leave you with a challenge. It's hard to get these issues addressed, whether we're talking about the Holocaust or Darfur or refugees or global poverty, unless they're getting attention. And as a journalist, I deeply believe in the capacity of the media to help keep these issues in the foreground. I'm also deeply disappointed that we in the media haven't done a better job on many of these issues. But I also want to be blunt. If you think we haven't done a good enough job on keeping these issues in the forefront in the last 15 years, and I would share that view, then I'm afraid it's going to be even worse in the next 15. The challenge is that the business model for much of the news media is collapsing. And if you're an executive producer of a TV show, you can send a camera crew off to try to cover the refugee crisis, to try to cover what's happening in Aleppo. And your ratings will drop compared to a rival channel that puts a Democrat and a Republican in a studio together and has them yell at each other. That's the fundamental constraint we face. One of the things that I found particularly depressing followed an effort at trying to have foundations provide a business model. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation essentially bribed ABC News to cover important global issues. It wasn't called a bribe, it was called a grant. And it was controversial within the development community, because why should Bill and Melinda Gates be using scarce resources not to vaccinate kids, but to pay television executives at ABC to do their jobs? But in fact, ABC did a terrific job with the Gates money. They did fabulous stories on maternal health, on micronutrients, on hunger. And so the Gates Foundation went back after a year and said, we'd like to renew our grant. And ABC News said, no, we don't want to take your money, because we can see from our metrics that when we air these important stories, that's when viewers switch the channel. In that context, I think it's going to be really hard to get adequate attention on some of these global crises. We in the media have to do a better job. You've got to hold our feet to the fire, hold us to account, to encourage us to do so. But my challenge to all of you is that you all have your own spotlights in one form or another. It's your Facebook page, it's your book club, it's your dinner table conversation. And I hope that if we in the news media end up dropping the ball in the coming years, that all of you will help pick it up. Because unless we keep these issues in front of us, they're just not going to get addressed any more today than they were in 1942 with Jan Karski. Thanks very much. I'm really honored to be here.
So this is a formal ceremony. Hopefully, Nick will be able to hang this in the most prominent spot in his office. The award reads, Jan Karski Educational Foundation presents the Spirit of Jan Karski Award to Nicholas Kristof for his unflagging efforts to draw public attention to to humanitarian issues around the world through his passionate reporting and powerful writing.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The idea of this evening was not to discuss politics, and we will not discuss politics. I'm glad we were able to take our mind off for at least a few moments and not think about these highly rated programs on TV and think about maybe this not as well-rated programs or not as well-rated events, which are so important in daily lives. I'm not sure what was highly rated during Karski's times. I'm not sure if there was rating. Maybe there wasn't. And one thing I know is that during Karski's times, I think there was less media. So media's work was actually, in a sense, easier. Because to the degree that you were able to think, all right, I have 3 newspapers and 2 TV stations, I will find my news and I will learn enough. And the way I see it is now we have uncounted number of TV stations, news media, not to mention social media and so on and so forth. And there's only 24 hours a day and you have to shine. So how do you shine? Either you show the debates like Nick is saying, or you use language, or you use statements which are atrocious, which are impossible to understand and impossible to appreciate. But that gets you rating. That gets you rating, and that's the horrendous moments of the day. I'm here to just say a few words about the foundation. We started 4 years ago, and the mission really is to spread the word about Karski, spread the word about him and about what he was doing and about a certain moral stance he represented. I think more than ever today, it's important to understand and realize what he was about. Next, I'm here also to say thank you. Thank you to the new school deans, Dean Milberg, Dean Kostcheva. Thank you very, very much. Professor Martinia, Jeff Goldberg. Kirill, without you, it wouldn't have happened, so very, very much appreciate. We have a number of board members here who voted to give Nix the award. Bob Billingsley, I just saw him coming in. Cheryl Fishbein, Igal Ozhehov, Richard and Emily Cohen, Pavel Volkanovich. It's great to have you here, and it's really, really tremendous to be together to think a moment about bigger issues of the world. Patty Kenna and Irene Pletka, we really, really appreciate your support. Viktor Markovich, it's great to have you here as well. Most importantly, this event wouldn't happen without the 3 stars, Bożena Zaremba, Erika Fishbein, and Karolina Kozura. They put this all together. And they have a little present for you as you walk out. Thank you very, very much for coming. It's a great moment to have you here, and Nick, congratulations. Thank you.